July 2026. Gillette Stadium, Boston. 65,000 people holding one collective breath in the humid night air. Julian Nagelsmann stands rigid on the touchline as Paraguay's last penalty rips past the German keeper's fingertips, and 3 years of planning come apart in front of him. Germany, four-time world champions, are out in the round of 32, beaten on penalties. Yet another World Cup campaign ending in embarrassment, the third in a row. The silence rolling through the German end of the stadium reads less like disappointment than like grief and disbelief. Within days, Nagelsmann had resigned, visibly exhausted. And the whole country was already debating one name, a man who, just weeks earlier at the same World Cup, had been apologizing on live television for even mentioning the job. This, on the one hand, is the story of how Jürgen Klopp became Germany's national coach, one of the more improbable returns modern football has produced in the last few decades. A man who, 18 months earlier, had walked away from management insisting he was spent, suddenly brought back to answer the grief of a knocked-down nation. But this isn't only Klopp's story. His return was the loudest of a whole run of them. In the weeks after the 2026 World Cup, one federation after another went looking for solutions or a new manager. France brought back an old icon it had waited years for. England, of all people, decided to stick with a manager many people in the country wanted gone. Belgium quietly handed the job to a new man without any fuss at all. And Italy, turned down again and again, was still unable to find anyone at all. But we will get to those in time. Jürgen Klopp's story, though, begins on the pitch, not the touchline. He signed for Mainz 05 in 1990 and stayed at the small southern German club for 11 years. 325 games, 52 goals, and a slow slide from striker to midfielder to, eventually, right back, which says plenty about how much he valued his usefulness over his ego. Under coach Wolfgang Frank, he experienced what he later called a tectonic shift in how he understood the game, a back four and zone marking. At this point, a genuinely radical idea in a German football culture that was still attached to the sweeper. On the 27th of February 2001, Mainz were bottom of the table and the club's coffers were empty. President Harald Strutz and manager Christian Heidel did something close to reckless. They made Klopp, still an active player, the interim head coach, with no license, only credibility, but plenty of it. He saved the club from relegation that season, watched it fall short in 2002 and 2003, missing promotion by a single point, then a single goal, and finally, in 2004, took Mainz up to the Bundesliga. "We didn't have a plan B," Strutz admitted years later. "We had Kloppo." And just like that, a group of friends had quietly invented a machine. 4 years later, Klopp took that machine to Borussia Dortmund, a club still climbing out of a near bankruptcy and was widely expected to struggle in mid-table, if at all. Klopp's so-called Gegenpressing arrived in the Bundesliga like a shockwave. Teams that used to pass their way out of trouble suddenly found 11 yellow shirts hunting the ball down before it even landed. Titles followed in 2011, with Dortmund winning their first Bundesliga title since 2002, and in 2012 a glorious 5-2 victory over Bayern Munich in the DFB Cup final completed the club's first ever domestic double. The match that actually defines this era, though, is not a win. It is Wembley 2013, the Champions League final against Bayern. Ilkay Gundogan levelled from the penalty spot after Bayern had gone ahead, and for a stretch it genuinely felt like Dortmund's night. Then, in the 89th minute, Arjen Robben found the gap Klopp's back four had held shut for 88 minutes, and the trophy went to Munich. Klopp later described it as one of the most painful nights of his career. 2 years later, in 2015, he left Borussia Dortmund for Merseyside, bringing an end to a hugely successful chapter at the club. By then, he had transformed Dortmund into one of Europe's most admired teams and left as a manager held in the highest regard by players, supporters, and the wider football world. His departure felt less like the loss of a coach and more like the end of an era. On the 8th of October 2015, Klopp's Liverpool introduction then produced one of the most quoted press conferences in modern football. With a small jab at Mourinho, who by then was already known as the Special One, Klopp instead introduced himself as the Normal One.
Does anybody in this room think that I can do wonder? No? So, let me work. I'm a totally normal guy. I came from Black Forest.
A line that instantly set the tone for his time on Merseyside. When Klopp arrived, Liverpool were a club in transition rather than in contention, sitting 10th in the Premier League and still searching for a clear identity. From there, he rebuilt the club piece by piece around the same high-intensity, relentless style that produced 3 titles and the Champions League final for Borussia Dortmund. But it was not just the results that changed the mood, it was the feeling around the club. Klopp gave Liverpool back its energy, its belief, and its sense of purpose. In this process, he again turned Liverpool fans from doubters into believers and eventually into followers of one of the most exciting teams in Europe, just as he had done in Dortmund. The peak came between 2018 and 2020 in a fierce rivalry with Pep Guardiola's Manchester City that pushed both clubs to extraordinary levels and lifted the entire Premier League with it. Liverpool won their 6th European Cup in 2019, then followed it with a record-breaking 99 points and finally ended a 30-year wait for the league title. But nothing sustains forever. By January 2024, the cost of 9 years at that intensity was written all over Klopp's face. He was, in his own words, running out of energy. In May 2024, he said goodbye at Anfield with a pledge never to manage another English club. All 53,394 people inside watching him lose a quiet battle against his own tears. The man who had been the engine of 2 different clubs had simply run out of fuel. But against all expectations, he did not stay retired for long. On the 1st of January 2025, Klopp took a job nobody expected, head of global soccer for Red Bull, overseeing a network from Leipzig and Salzburg to New York and Bragantino. Purists in Mainz and Dortmund were furious. Tying his name to an energy drink conglomerate looked to them like a betrayal of the 50+1 values he had appeared to champion his whole career. Behind the corporate title, though, Klopp was doing something closer to an apprenticeship, mentoring coaches such as RB Leipzig's Ole Werner and learning digital scouting platforms and terms he says he had never once needed in 25 years on a touchline. By mid-2026, there were reports of internal friction, with his job even said to be at risk. Red Bull's Oliver Mintzlaff dismissed that flatly as total nonsense. Whatever the truth of it, Klopp looked for the first time in a while genuinely recharged. That was on full display during the World Cup, where he worked as a pundit for Magenta TV alongside 2 of Germany's former players, Thomas Müller and Mats Hummels. Discussing Julian Nagelsmann's setup during Germany's group match against Curaçao, a routine game few outside Germany were watching, which is exactly why one loose word carried so far. Klopp used a single word, nosh, meaning still, that landed like a countdown clock on the manager's job. The backlash was instant, with critics accusing him of undermining a colleague from the comfort of a television studio. He apologized live, his voice audibly cracking, and called himself an idiot on air. And then the real negotiations started to happen, not in Frankfurt, but in a hotel lounge at JFK Airport in New York, where DFB officials had flown in under the cover of tournament post-mortem meetings and then quietly slipped their own security details to sit with Klopp. President Bernd Neuendorf and Vice President Hans-Joachim Watzke, Klopp's old boss from his Dortmund days, spent 4 hours with him under complete secrecy. 3 men, an airport lounge, and the future of German football on the table. Shortly after, Watzke already joked about landing a patriotism discount on the salary, which came in just above the roughly €7 million Nagelsmann had been paid. The harder problem was Red Bull, where Klopp's contract ran until 2029. Rather than a transfer-style release fee, the DFB reportedly committed to a 7-figure donation to Wings for Life and a handful of future friendlies at Leipzig's Red Bull Arena, the kind of arrangement that rarely makes it into a press release. Nobody had to write an ugly headline about buying out a national coach, and Red Bull had its stadium filled by the biggest brand in German football. The contract ran all the way to the 2030 World Cup, July 24, 2026. The DFB campus in Frankfurt is packed, with over 150 journalists in the room and dozens more on a stuttering online link from around the world. The man walking to the podium has a new job title: Bundestrainer. Klopp opens with a 10-minute monologue that needs no notes. He calls the job the high point of my career, which, given Dortmund, Liverpool and everything in between, is no small thing to say out loud. He has Bock for it, properly and irrepressibly, and the national team, he says, can unite us Germans better than anything else. Then the tone drops. He has watched what tabloid scrutiny did to the private lives of Nagelsmann and Tuchel, and he draws a hard line around his own family. If the press hound his wife and children the same way, he walks with no severance and no negotiation. If you don't leave my family in peace, I'm gone.
Dem Tag, an dem ihr das nicht mehr wollt, sagt ihr es und ich bin weg. Ohne Abfindung. Wenn ihr morgen sagt, der ist bin ich weg. Wenn der DFB sagt, so machen wir nicht weiter, bin ich weg. Wenn ihr euch daneben benehmt und meine Familie nicht in Ruhe lasst, bin ich weg.
The room goes quiet in a completely different way than the German fans in Boston did. Not despair this time, but respect and humility. Then it comes to football. Klopp has already built a candidate list, most of it drafted quietly during his Red Bull months, long before the DFB picked up the phone. He returns to a straightforward back four, with no more of the asymmetric experiments that left Nagelsmann's Germany exposed. Joshua Kimmich moves back to central midfield, his natural habitat, with Alexander Pavlovic's 92 to 94% passing accuracy doing the mopping up behind him. Wingers stay wide and stretch the pitch the old-fashioned way, opening pockets for Jamal Musiala and Florian Wirtz to work in. Up front, Nicolo Tresoldi, 19 goals for Club Brugge last season, and Jinan Pejsinovic are penciled in as the answer to Germany's long-running shortage of a genuine finisher. Klopp is clearly building around a young, high-intensity core, and the established names who don't fit that profile are conspicuously absent from his early plans. No one really expected anything else from this man. But, as already mentioned, Germany was not the only federation searching for a new man. In Paris, the change carried the feel of a coronation. Didier Deschamps had led Les Bleus for 14 years, winning a World Cup and a Nations League title, and reaching 2 major finals by the narrowest of margins. He left after a strange ending, 4th place and a chaotic 6-4 defeat to England in the bronze medal match. A rather strange farewell to the international stage for Deschamps, especially since many football fans around the world expected nothing less than the title from this France team. But as one chapter closed, another legend had been waiting in the wings for 5 years. A man who had turned down PSG, Manchester United, and nearly every offer since leaving Real Madrid in 2021 because he was always waiting for this one. Zinedine Zidane, 3 straight Champions Leagues at Madrid, 2 La Liga titles, and, as a player, 2 goals in the 1998 World Cup final on home soil, alongside a captain named Didier Deschamps. Those two have been linked by that trophy for almost 30 years. Now the reins pass from one legend to the other. Zidane signed through 2030, and the calendar hands him no easy start. Turkey on September 25th, then Belgium 3 days later. The bigger question, though, is whether the job even resembles the one he mastered. Everything he won at Madrid came with the best squad in the world and a transfer market to reshape it every summer. France gives him none of that. A fixed, but of course extraordinary pool of players, a few short camps a year, and little of the daily control that made him great. Following 14 years of Deschamps and the bar he set, Zidane's real challenge isn't repeating himself. It's winning in a job built on almost the opposite of what he knows as a manager. And if France's answer was a new face, England's was the exact opposite. They kept the manager they already had, though only after a collapse that made retaining him a debate in itself. Going into the semi-final against Argentina with the deepest squad in their history, they led for 55 minutes through Anthony Gordon. Then, Thomas Tuchel changed the shape of the game. He pulled Gordon, his goal scorer for a defender, shifted to a back five, and by the 82nd minute had taken off Declan Rice, his most influential midfielder, for another defensive body. England finished with 12% possession over the final half hour. Argentina took the advantage and scored twice. The verdicts were harsh. Gary Neville called it a failure of nerve. Wayne Rooney said the substitutions sent a message of panic. And Emi Martinez said Argentina smelt blood and accused England of losing their nerve entirely. Tuchel's own explanation was more provocative still. English players, he argued, simply do not have the same relationship with the ball under pressure that Spanish or Argentinian players do. Not in the DNA. It was a striking thing to say about a country whose football association had spent 12 years building a coaching curriculum literally called England DNA. What kept him in his job then was of course not this ironic diagnosis, but the bronze medal itself, third place, England's best World Cup finish since 1966. The FA reaffirmed his contract through Euro 2028, a tournament England will host, and Kane backed him publicly. The mandate for the next 2 years carries one German word: Mut, courage. Tuchel has to teach a golden generation how to extend a lead rather than merely defend one. Not every change came with a collapse or a controversy. Belgium was the one nobody argued about. When Rudi Garcia's contract was not renewed, the Royal Belgian Football Association simply announced Mark van Bommel on July 24th, a 2-year deal through Euro 2028 with no drama attached. Out of work since 2024, Van Bommel had earned the job on the back of a historic season at Royal Antwerp, a first league title in 66 years and a domestic double, built on a reputation as a hard, straightforward leader. And he is not walking into an empty room. Kevin De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku and Thibaut Courtois are all still around, watching to see whether this is a new beginning or a gentle managing of one era into retirement. There is a language wrinkle too. Van Bommel does not speak French yet and has brought in Boudewijn Zenden as a bridge. His debut comes on September 25th, away to Italy in Rome, against a side that has only just and chaotically appointed a manager of its own. Italy is the last and probably the strangest part of this week's video. After missing yet another World Cup, having been beaten in a March 2026 playoff by Bosnia-Herzegovina, the federation went in search of someone to lead a full rebuild, only to be turned down by the man at the top of its list. Pep Guardiola held 3 days of talks before declining, citing burnout and a desire to spend time with his aging father, and reportedly walked away from a deal worth around 20 million euros. Attention then turned to Andrea Pirlo, before that too fell apart, and not over tactics. Since leaving European management, Pirlo had been coaching in the UAE for Dubai United, a club tied to a Russian oligarch, and in October 2025 he had signed on as a brand ambassador for the Russian betting company Fonbet, followed by a promotional trip to Moscow in May 2026, mid-war. When that appointment collapsed, it took the federation's own leadership with it. Technical director Paolo Maldini and his advisor Leonardo resigned within days, barely 2 weeks into the job. And so, after chasing Guardiola, courting Pirlo and losing its own leadership in the process, Italy fell back on the most familiar name of all. Federation President Giovanni Malago confirmed Roberto Mancini as the new head coach, a second spell for the man who, back in 2021, had led Italy to their first European title in more than half a century. On paper, it is a return to a proven winner. In practice, it looks closer to a last resort. Mancini walked out on this same national team in 2023 to take a lucrative job in Saudi Arabia, and plenty in Italy have never quite forgiven him for it. With Claudio Ranieri expected to step in as technical director, Mancini's task is simple: end Italy's run of 3 straight missed World Cups and lead them to 2030. It all begins, fittingly, against Belgium on September 6, 2026. Each of these federations faced the same problem and answered it differently. France turned to a returning icon in Zidane, England, for all the criticism, held its nerve and its manager in Tuchel. Belgium made the quiet, no-fuss hire in Van Bommel. And Italy, after all its chaos, fell back on a familiar face of its own in Mancini. A whole generation of national team dugouts changing hands at once. For Klopp, though, the job comes with a pressure none of the others quite match. Germany has not simply hired a coach, it has pinned its hopes on one. After 3 tournaments of decline, an impatient public and a press quick to sharpen its knives are both waiting for him to turn things around at once, and the goodwill probably won't last long if he can't. The task in front of him is bigger than picking a starting 11. Under Nagelsmann, the team had become hard to read, no settled shape, little belief, and no one you could count on to score. Klopp has to rebuild the basics, a stable structure, the aggression and tempo that used to define German sides, and a group young and hungry enough to actually run for 90 minutes. The first tests are small ones, Nations League fixtures against the Netherlands, Greece and Serbia. But in Germany they will be watched like a referendum. He has the plan, the energy he feared he had lost, and the time to see it through. Let's see how it all turns out at the next big tournament in 2028.